They called me useless because I burned the dinner. Not sick, not forgetful. Just useless. That's the word Sandra used when she scraped the casserole dish into the trash like it was garbage and not food I'd spent my aching afternoon preparing. And the worst part wasn't her voice. It was the silence in the room. My son didn't say a word. Neither did my daughter. They all just sat there like it was normal to let someone call your mother that in her own kitchen. The burnt crust still smelled faintly sweet. Peaches and butter, overdone by 5 minutes. I had misjudged the timer. That's all. 5 minutes. "Mom, just let us handle dinner next time," Sandra had said, in that tight voice of hers, the one that always carried the edge of a reprimand. Then she turned to the kids. "We'll order something, okay? Grandma's tired. She didn't mean to ruin it. Didn't mean to ruin it." I stood there with the oven mitt still in my hands, looking at the casserole dish in the sink, trying to remember the last time someone in this house thanked me for anything. Not the laundry, not the grocery runs, not the babysitting. Not the check I quietly wrote for the roof last winter when the snow came early and the insurance came late. I wiped my hands on a towel and excused myself. No one tried to stop me. Not one person followed me up the stairs. In the quiet of my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sounds below. Plastic containers clattering, someone laughing at a phone video, a dog barking next door. Not one word about me. I was 78 years old and invisible in a house I'd helped build, pay for, and keep afloat more times than I could count. Once, years ago, this room had been my retreat. My late husband, Glenn, had painted it pale green because he knew I liked the way the morning sun looked on those walls. Now, it was just a place where I kept my slippers, my pills, and a folder full of receipts no one thought I remembered. But I remembered everything. I remembered co-signing the mortgage when David and Sandra's loan fell through the first time. I remembered the emergency vet bill when their Labrador swallowed a sock. I remembered the down payment on Molly's college apartment, even though she dropped out 2 semesters later. I remembered because it was my money, my name, my savings. I opened the drawer by my bed and pulled out the thin envelope I kept hidden under old birthday cards. Inside, a copy of the property deed, a few bank statements, the financial planner's card I never called, and a will I hadn't updated in 7 years. Useless. I traced the word with my finger on the edge of the envelope. That's what I was to them now. A woman who burned peaches and was best kept out of the kitchen. A woman they couldn't be bothered to protect when someone else called her names. A woman who existed for their convenience and comfort, not as a person in her own right. But what they didn't know, what they'd clearly forgotten, was that this woman still held the keys. I still had full control of the accounts. I still had my name on the title. And I still had the spine that raised 3 kids on a tight budget after Glenn died of a heart attack at 52. I closed the envelope carefully, stood up, and walked to the window. Down below, I saw them unloading paper bags of takeout from the car. Sandra's laugh carried in the evening air. My son stood beside her, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. Let them eat without me. Let them forget who I was, if they dared. Because I had just remembered, and that changes everything. The next morning, the house smelled like cinnamon rolls and coffee, but not from my hands. Sandra had taken over the kitchen, moving around in those silent little bursts that said, "See? This is how it should be done." She didn't say anything about last night. Neither did David. Molly breezed through for her morning smoothie and left before I came downstairs. No one mentioned the word, no one apologized. Maybe they thought I'd forgotten. But there's something about being 78 that people don't understand. You don't forget. It's just that you've learned when to be quiet and when to sharpen your silence. I sat at the far end of the table with a cup of tea that had gone cold before anyone thought to ask if I wanted something warm. Their voices moved around me like I wasn't there. Wedding plans, gym memberships, David's new opportunity with some consulting firm. All while I sat like furniture, polite and passive. That used to be enough for me. Used to. After breakfast, I returned to my room and opened my old sewing chest. Not for the threads, but for the small wooden box tucked beneath the linens. Inside, letters, notes. Birthday cards from when the children were small, written in crayon and clumsy print. "Best mommy ever," one said. Another, "When I grow up, I want to be like you." I used to hold these to my chest when they'd grown distant. Proof, I told myself, that love had once existed in this house. But love, I was learning, was not the same as respect. You can love a pet. You can love a thing. But respect, that's what you owe a person, especially someone who fed you, sheltered you, paid your way through years you've chosen to forget. I closed the box and pulled open my filing cabinet instead, row after row of receipts, withdrawals, transfers, loans repaid by silence. I sat with a pen and began to circle dates, highlight names, make notes in the margins like a lawyer building a case. I wasn't angry. I was focused. I thought about the time 2 years ago when David had lost his job and I offered to cover the electric bill just for this month. That month turned into 9. I remembered when Sandra wanted to take time off after her surgery. I paid the grocery bill for 4 straight weeks. Never a thank you. Just new requests. That same year, they started calling me forgetful whenever I asked about the balances. "You're thinking of something else, Mom." "That wasn't this account." "It's fine. Just don't worry about it." But I remembered. And I was worried. Not about the money, but about the way they looked through me. The way they only saw the burned casserole and not the woman who once worked double shifts to afford ballet lessons and football cleats. They'd taken my silence for ignorance, my generosity for obligation, my presence for permission. They were wrong. At lunch, I didn't join them. I stayed upstairs and made myself a peanut butter sandwich, cut into triangles the way I used to do for them when they were little. I ate slowly, staring out the window at the same backyard where they used to run barefoot in the summer, shrieking through sprinklers and climbing the rusted swing set Glenn had built. And now, here we were. The swing set was gone. So was the laughter. And all that remained was this cold, quiet kitchen where they called me useless and left me to feed myself. That afternoon, I called a cab. I didn't say where I was going, just told Sandra I needed a few errands. "Oh, Mom," she said, without looking up from her phone. "You really shouldn't be going out on your own." I smiled. "I think I'll manage." I took my purse, my envelope, and a notepad. As the cab pulled away from the house, I looked back one last time. They think they're the only ones with plans. Let's see how they handle mine. The bank still smelled like disinfectant and carpet glue, just like it always had. Same gray chairs, same polite nods from the tellers who didn't quite recognize me but offered a smile out of habit. I sat in the waiting area with my handbag on my lap, the envelope tucked inside like a secret. I was finally ready to tell. A young man in a blazer called my name, "Mrs. Mason?" and led me into a glass-walled office that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never known a drafty window or an overdue bill. He introduced himself as Simon, my personal banking advisor, and asked what brought me in today. "I want to go over my accounts," I said, smoothing the hem of my coat. "Of course," he said cheerfully. "Any specific concerns?" I paused, looked him in the eye. "I want to stop funding people who treat me like a burden." The smile faltered, just slightly. "Okay, let's take a look." As he pulled up the screen, I slid the envelope across the desk. "These are recurring payments, transfers, automatic withdrawals. Most of them go to my son or his household. I want them stopped. All of them." He hesitated. "I can certainly help with that, but may I ask if something's changed recently?" I folded my hands in my lap. "No, son. What changed is me." It took nearly an hour. There were more payments than even I had remembered. The electric bill, a monthly grocery delivery subscription in Sandra's name, a student loan payment for Molly, a car insurance policy I apparently still paid on a vehicle I hadn't ridden in since the pandemic. Simon was patient, professional. He offered water. I declined. I didn't need comfort. I needed clarity. When we were done, he printed out a summary. "You've been very generous," he said quietly, handing me the papers. "No," I corrected him. "I've been very quiet. That's not the same thing." Outside the bank, I stood on the sidewalk and let the breeze lift the edges of my scarf. I could have gone straight home, let them find out by surprise. But I wasn't done. I walked 2 blocks to the law office where Glenn and I had updated our wills after his first heart scare. The receptionist still recognized me. "Mrs. Mason, we haven't seen you in ages." I gave her a thin smile. "Well, it's time." 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Mr. Keating, a kind-faced man with more white hair than I remembered. He adjusted his glasses as he listened, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. "I want to revise the will," I said simply, "and I want to set up a trust, one that protects my assets from misuse." "For any particular reason?" he asked gently. "My son's wife called me useless," I said, right in front of him, and he said nothing. His face didn't change, but I saw the flicker of something. Sympathy, maybe, or recognition. "I see," he said quietly. "And the trust. Do you have someone specific in mind?" I nodded. "My granddaughter, Anna. She visits me every week. She brings her own tea bags because she knows I don't like the flavored ones. She asks how I sleep. She listens when I talk." "Good," he said, making notes. "We can absolutely make that happen." As he explained the details, contingencies, clauses, transfer options, I listened, but my mind was elsewhere. Not on revenge. This wasn't about punishment. It was about putting value back where it belonged, about no longer feeding a system that took and never thought to give back. When everything was in motion, Mr. Keating stood to walk me out. "You know, Mrs. Mason," he said, "you're not the first mother I've helped with this kind of thing." I raised an eyebrow. "But I hope you'll be the first who doesn't cry in the car afterward." I smiled. Not a wide smile, but a certain one. "I won't cry," I said. "But they might." There's a stillness that settles in a woman after she makes a decision. Not relief, exactly, more like clarity. I felt it the moment I stepped back into the house. The television was on, the dog barked once from the laundry room, and someone had left a trail of cracker crumbs up the stairs. Same chaos, same house. But I wasn't the same. Sandra was in the kitchen, talking on her phone while loading the dishwasher one-handed. She looked up when I walked in, did a quick scan of my face like she was measuring my mood, then returned to her call. I don't know. He said the job might not go through, she muttered into the phone. And we've still got tuition due next month. Yeah, I know. But we'll figure it out. Worst case, Mom can... She glanced at me. I raised an eyebrow. Never mind. I'll call you back. She ended the call, gave me a tight smile. Everything okay, Helen? You were gone a while. Everything's fine, I said, removing my coat. Just some things I needed to straighten out. She nodded, not really listening. Did you remember to pick up the milk? I wasn't at the store. Oh. Pause. Well, no biggie. No biggie. Like I was a grocery errand gone wrong. Upstairs, I folded away the legal forms and banking statements and tucked them into a drawer I knew no one ever opened. Let them keep thinking I was just the lady who forgot timers and needed help with online bill pay. It was better this way, for now. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the picture of Glenn and me on the nightstand. He was smiling, squinting at the sun, one arm around my shoulder like he always did when he was proud. He used to say I had a core like rope, thin but strong, weathered but never torn. He believed in me more than I believed in myself. And now, years later, I realized I still had that same rope inside me. It had just been buried under layers of baked casseroles and check writing and bending over backwards. I thought back to the early years, the ones no one remembered but me. How I cleaned motel rooms for $8 an hour when Glenn got sick. How I sold my grandmother's gold locket to keep our electricity on the winter David broke his arm. How I raised 3 kids with no degrees, no retirement plan, and no one to call for backup. Just me, my stubbornness, and a handwritten budget taped to the fridge. There was a time when every sock in this house was matched by my hands. When every birthday cake came from my oven. When every scraped knee ran to me first. And now, I was the woman whose food wasn't good enough, whose memory couldn't be trusted, whose only value was measured in dollars and square footage. They'd forgotten. But I hadn't. I hadn't forgotten the cold nights in the motel when I warmed baby bottles under my arm because we didn't have a microwave. I hadn't forgotten the late shift walks home, clutching pepper spray, counting every porch light like a step toward safety. I hadn't forgotten the time Sandra came sobbing to me, 3 months pregnant, thinking David would leave, and I held her in this very room, whispering that everything would be all right, and then wrote the check for her prenatal care. I hadn't forgotten anything. That evening, David knocked lightly on my door. Hey, Mom, we're thinking of grilling this weekend. Want to help with the marinade? I smiled, polite. Oh, I don't know, I said. I wouldn't want to ruin dinner again. He froze in the doorway. Come on, don't say it like that. Like what? You know, like you're mad. I looked at him. My son, 48 years old. A man who still flinched when he thought he might not get his way. I'm not mad, I said softly. Just remembering. He didn't know what to say to that. Left after a mumbled, okay, well, let us know. He hadn't noticed the papers gone from the fridge, the receipts missing from the basket, the calendar where I used to jot reminders for their bills, blank now, wiped clean. Let them notice slowly. Let them feel the edges of the absence like splinters. Because once a mother decides to stand up, the whole house learns a new balance. Anna always knocked twice, sharp, quick little taps, and waited for me to open the door, even though I'd told her 100 times to just walk in. She respected my space. That was something most people in this house had long since forgotten. Hey, Grandma, she said, smiling as I opened the door. She held a paper bag in one hand and a bundle of tulips in the other. I brought almond scones from that place you like, and these were on sale. Figured the kitchen could use a little color. I stepped aside to let her in. The kitchen could use a few things, I said. Color's the least of them. She tilted her head, sensing the edge in my voice. She always noticed things. Everything okay? Sit down, sweetheart, I said. I'll put on the kettle. We moved through our usual rhythm, teacups from the second shelf, honey instead of sugar, that ridiculous show she liked playing quietly in the background. But today, I didn't bother with small talk. I was too full, too tired of swallowing the things that mattered. Anna, I said, pouring the tea. Can I ask you something? Of course. If someone gives everything they have, time, money, energy, for decades, and they mess up once, what do you call that person? She blinked. I guess, dependable? Human? Not useless? Her face darkened. Who said that? I didn't answer. She already knew. Everyone in this house knew what Sandra had said, and everyone had chosen to pretend they didn't hear it. I'm so sorry, Anna said, her voice low. That's not fair. You're the reason this house even stands. I looked at her, really looked. 19, sharp, sincere. With a little birthmark under her left ear, just like her grandfather had. Glenn would have adored her. I've been thinking, I said, about things I've done, what I've paid for. Anna leaned in, quiet, listening the way no one else ever did. I paid for this roof, I continued. The last car, Molly's community college, your dad's braces, the solar panels Sandra brags about on Facebook, and I never asked for anything but kindness. You deserve so much more than what you've been given, she said. I looked out the window, where the garden was just starting to thaw from winter. I've spent so long keeping this family upright, I said. I didn't notice when they stopped holding me up in return. Anna reached for my hand. What are you going to do? I squeezed her fingers. I already started, I said. Stop the payments, change the accounts. I'm meeting with a lawyer again next week. She didn't gasp, didn't panic, just nodded. I'll help you however I can. That's why you'll be all right, I said. You still remember what matters. For the rest of the visit, we talked about books. She brought up a course she was taking in ethics, and I told her about the first time I saw injustice up close. The landlord who doubled our rent overnight when Glenn got sick. The neighbor who called code enforcement on us when we couldn't afford new siding. Before she left, Anna looked me in the eye. Grandma, if you ever need a place to go, you can come stay with me. I mean it. I smiled. I won't need to. But it means the world that you'd say so. After she was gone, I walked through the house. Sandra had gone to a Pilates class. David was out back tinkering with the sprinkler system. No one noticed Anna had even been here. I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and my notepad. Anna, 50 week into trust, education clause, living expenses post-21. David, Sandra, 0. Molly, re-evaluate after 1 year, based on behavior. House, sell or rent? Lawyer advice needed. I stared at the paper for a long time, then underlined one word, enough. The law office was quiet, like always. Thick carpet, low lights, the kind of place where even time walked softly. Mr. Keating greeted me with that warm, professional calm he always carried, as if nothing in the world could rattle him, not even a 78-year-old woman walking in with a fire behind her eyes. He closed the door behind me and motioned toward the chair. You look well, Mrs. Mason. I feel well, I said, sitting. Clearer than I've been in years. I reviewed the notes from our last meeting. You mentioned wanting to update both your will and your financial arrangements. That's right, I said, and opened the folder in my lap. And I have a few specifics to add. I handed him the paper I'd written the day Anna visited. It wasn't formal, but it was enough to make the intention clear. He scanned it silently, lips pressed together. When he reached the part that listed David Sandra 0, he glanced at me but said nothing. I want to put everything into a living trust, I said, with clear protections. No one gets a cent unless they meet certain conditions. And no one touches it without my say-so while I'm alive. Very doable, he said, pulling a clean sheet of paper in front of him. May I ask, what triggered this? I leaned back. My daughter-in-law called me useless. He stopped writing. I've given hundreds of thousands over the years, I said, voice steady. Not because they asked, but because I loved them. Because I believed that love would be returned someday. Instead, I'm treated like a worn-out dish rag who can't even be trusted with a casserole. I'm sorry to hear that, he said gently. I'm not here for sympathy, I replied. I'm here for boundaries. He nodded once and started writing again. We spent an hour going through scenarios. What if David contested the changes? What if Sandra tried to argue coercion? What if Molly, once she got wind of all this, started calling again, suddenly eager to reconnect? I've spent a lifetime preparing for everyone else's emergencies, I said. It's time I prepare for my own. When we were done, Mr. Keating looked up from the papers and said something that stayed with me. You know, most people who walk into my office at your age are here because someone has pushed them into it. But you're the one doing the pushing. I smiled, slow and small. I was pushed once, I said, when Glenn died, and I promised myself I'd never let the world shove me around again. Took me a while to remember that promise. On the way out, the receptionist offered me a peppermint. I took one, slipped it into my purse, just like I used to do for Anna when she was small. I'd always keep a few in my coat pocket, ready for her little hand to find. Outside, the sky had started to cloud over, the kind of gray that threatened rain but might just hold it back for another day. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the wind, letting the silence settle around me. The law was in motion now. The money was protected. The silence I'd carried for so long had been replaced with structure, clause by clause, and I had one more stop to make. The woman at the bank was younger than I expected, early 30s perhaps, but her eyes were sharp and she wore her blazer like someone who understood responsibility. Her name was Erica, and she introduced herself as my new account manager. Mrs. Mason, I've reviewed the notes from your last visit, she said, offering me a seat in her glass office. Simon set up the temporary suspensions on the recurring transfers, but it looks like you're ready to formalize things. I took out my notebook, the same one I'd used for grocery lists, back when they still trusted me to cook. I want everything gone, I said, flipping to a marked page. All automatic payments, scheduled transfers, linked accounts, cut every tie. She nodded slowly. We can do that. Just so I understand, we're talking about all outgoing activity except your personal bills and expenses? That's right. Keep the utilities on this house, my phone, health insurance. The rest, they can figure it out themselves. Erica paused, glancing at her screen. I see you've had some long-standing family-linked payments. Mortgage support for Mr. David Mason, vehicle insurance for Sandra Mason, and a student loan payoff account for Molly Mason. You'd like all three terminated? I looked her square in the eye. Let them call me when they notice, if they ever do. She clicked through a few windows. There may be some fees for early cancellations. I've paid worse penalties, I said. This one's a bargain. She gave a faint smile and continued typing. I could tell she wasn't used to seeing women like me sitting across from her desk, steady, certain, and not asking for permission. When she finished, she printed out a cancellation confirmation list, 6 pages thick. I looked at the numbers, the names, the dates. 14 years of quiet generosity, 6 figures worth of support, not a single thank you card. I also understand you'd like to establish a new trust account, she said. Yes, in my granddaughter's name. Anna Mason. She's 19, smart, kind. I want her education and first years of adult life protected. Erica nodded. We can create a custodial trust with provisions for tuition, housing, and basic living expenses. Do you want to set restrictions on how and when the funds are accessed? Absolutely, I said. I want her to know she's supported, but I also want her to earn her steps forward. We discussed the details, trigger ages, usage categories, a small monthly stipend that would increase slightly once she graduated from college. It felt strange, building something that would last beyond me, but it also felt right, not flashy, not emotional, just solid, practical, like I'd always been. When we were finished, Erica handed me a folder and shook my hand with both of hers. You're doing something powerful, she said. A lot of people stay stuck. You're not. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, you reach a point in life where you realize silence doesn't protect you. It just teaches people how to ignore you better. I left the bank feeling like the air had shifted. The town looked the same, gray pavement, honking cars, a teen in a hoodie skating down the curb. But something in me had moved, settled. I was no longer tethered, no longer funding the silence that followed every insult. No longer the quiet sponsor behind a house that forgot my name unless there was a bill to pay. At home, I made myself a sandwich, just ham and mustard, simple and mine, and sat by the window, watching the last of the autumn leaves twist down from the maple tree Glenn planted the year David was born. They called me useless, but useless women don't pay mortgages, they don't build trust funds, and they don't sign legal documents that sever decades of exploitation with one neat signature. I finished my sandwich and opened a book I hadn't read in years. There was no celebration, no announcement, just peace. And that was more than enough. It started with a text from Sandra. Hey, Helen, the bank app is acting weird. Can you check if the mortgage payment went through? No greeting, no warmth, just straight to business. As if I was still the family's unpaid accountant. I didn't answer. An hour later, another one came, this time from David. Hi, Mom. Did the automatic payment for the house stop? Sandra says the account's showing a 0 balance. I left that one unread, too. By evening, the phone started ringing. First once, then twice. By the third call, I recognized the rhythm of panic in David's number. It rang until voicemail picked up. The silence between rings was almost sweeter than the calls themselves. I made a cup of chamomile tea and let the steam rise against my cheeks. Outside, the porch light flickered. Probably needed a new bulb. I'd get to it tomorrow, or not. That was the thing now. I got to choose what I did, and when. Then the door slammed downstairs. Helen? David's voice. Not angry. Not yet. Just unsettled. I didn't answer. A moment later, the soft knock at my bedroom door. Can we talk? I opened it just enough to see him standing there in his work clothes, phone in hand, brow furrowed. The same boy I'd once held through chicken pox, now blinking at me like I was a stranger in his own house. "I'm not sure what's going on," he said, voice too calm. "But the mortgage bounced. The grocery card, too. I checked with the bank, and they said all scheduled payments were revoked." I stepped aside to let him in. He hesitated, then crossed the threshold. "They also said the trust account was changed," he continued. "That Anna's name is on something big." I met his eyes. "So the bank talked to you?" He nodded. "They weren't supposed to," I said. "Not without my permission. I called pretending to be your financial proxy. They must have thought you could still use me like you always have." That stopped him. "Mom," he said, quieter, "why would you do this? Why now?" I walked to my dresser, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a thin stack of envelopes, neatly labeled dates, amounts, notes in my careful, looping handwriting. I handed him one. "Remember this?" I asked. "January 2015. Your car loan defaulted. I wired the payment before it went to collections." He flipped through it. Another envelope. "June 2017. You forgot Molly's summer tuition deadline. I overnighted a check." Another. "March 2020. Sandra's business closed during lockdown. I covered 3 months of bills so you could stay afloat." David looked smaller with every sheet. Older, diminished. I sat down in my chair. "David," I said softly, "I've paid for this roof, that kitchen, the wedding, the dentist, the groceries, even the dog's surgery. And I never asked for much in return. But last week, your wife called me useless. And you just stood there." He looked down. I didn't know what to say. "You didn't say anything." We sat in silence, the weight of it heavy between us. "I'm sorry," he finally muttered. "Sandra was stressed. I should have stepped in." "You should have remembered who you were speaking to." "I didn't think you'd take it this far." "This far?" I echoed. "David, I gave you half my life without question. You're lucky all I took back was the checkbook." He ran a hand through his hair. I remembered that gesture. He used to do it before report cards. "What now?" he asked. "You just cut us off?" "I set a boundary," I said. "You don't have to like it, but you will respect it." He stood, slowly. "Sandra's going to lose it." "I'm not worried about Sandra." He lingered at the door, looking at me like he was finally seeing the woman behind the wallet. Not the maid, not the cook, not the walking ATM, but the mother who had kept him alive when he was too small to even say thank you. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Then don't say anything," I replied. "Just think." When he left, the house felt quiet again. Not empty, just lighter. Downstairs, I heard the front door shut. A minute later, my phone buzzed on the table, a message from Anna. "Grandma, is everything okay? Dad looks like he's seen a ghost." I smiled, typed back. "Everything's finally just fine, sweetheart." I expected Sandra to come storming in first. She always led the charge when there was tension. Eyes narrowed, lips pursed, voice all clipped control. But she didn't. She waited, and that silence said more than if she'd kicked down my door. Instead, it was Molly. She hadn't been to the house in weeks, not since the night I burned dinner. But now, here she was, unannounced, uninvited, and already frowning before I opened the door. "Grandma?" she said flatly, pushing her sunglasses up into her hair. "Dad told me what you did." I stepped aside without a word, let her in, watched her stomp through the foyer like she still lived here, like this was her territory to reclaim. "I just don't get it," she said, turning to face me in the living room. "You've always helped us. What changed?" I motioned to the couch. She didn't sit. "What changed?" I said. was you all stopped pretending to care about anything but the money. That's not fair. No? I folded my hands calmly. When's the last time you visited without needing something? She blinked. That's not... Grandma, you're family. That's just how it is. No, Molly. That's how you've chosen to make it. There's a difference. She crossed her arms, mouth tightening. So, this is some kind of punishment? It's a boundary. You know what those are? Your therapist must have mentioned them. Her cheeks flushed. I'm not your piggy bank anymore, I continued. And I'm certainly not the maid you get to correct in front of guests. Molly took a step forward. I didn't say anything that night. I wasn't even part of that. You didn't stop it either. She looked away. That landed. I'm just trying to graduate, she said, quieter now. I have finals. I was counting on that loan payment. And I was counting on being treated with basic decency, I said. We all have our disappointments. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then her voice cracked, just slightly. I didn't mean to hurt you. I looked at her. Really looked. 21 years old. Worn at the edges. Smart, but spoiled. Capable, but unwilling. Still holding out her hand like the world owed her something. I'd given her so much. A laptop, textbooks, rent for her apartment in her sophomore year. Even paid for a spring break trip she lied about, saying it was a conference. You didn't mean it, I said, but you did it, and now you live with the result. She sat, finally. Shoulders slumped. I don't know what we're going to do, she said. Everyone's freaking out. Good. Her head jerked up. What? Let them panic, I said. Let them feel what it's like to fend for themselves. That's how I lived for years after your grandfather died. No fallbacks? No one to call? But that's not how it's supposed to be with family. No, I said gently. Family is supposed to protect one another, not use each other like spare change. Molly wiped at her eyes but didn't cry. I respected that. She wasn't weak, just untested. I don't hate you, Grandma, she said quietly. I know you don't, I replied. But love without respect is just sentiment. And sentiment doesn't keep the lights on. She stood. So this is it? You're just done with us? I'm done financing people who treat me like wallpaper, I said. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be a real one. No ledgers, no invoices. Just time, effort, honesty. She nodded, slow. I don't know if I can do that. You'll have to find out. At the door, she turned back once. Do you still want to come to my graduation? I looked at her for a long moment. That depends, I said. Do you want me there for me or for what I bring? She didn't answer, but I saw the question land somewhere deep inside her. And that was enough, for now. When the door closed behind her, I sat in the silence, sipping tea gone lukewarm. The house felt balanced, not empty, not angry, just quiet. And for the first time in decades, I knew the difference. I woke before the sun, as I always did. Not because I had somewhere to be. No, those days were long past. But because my body had been trained by decades of early mornings. Work, children, Glenn's medication schedule. Life rarely waited for comfort. Now, the house didn't need me, but my bones still stirred at 5:30. I sat at the edge of my bed, listening to the quiet. Not the strained silence of tension, but real quiet, peaceful, the kind that stretches out and doesn't beg to be filled. There was no breakfast to make, no errands to run, no lists of bills to pay for other people. The calendar was empty. For once, Nobody needed me, and the relief of that felt like air after a deep plunge underwater. I made myself oatmeal, just enough for one. I used the cinnamon Anna had brought from that organic shop she liked and added a spoonful of honey, not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted it. That, I realized, had become the simplest measure of my new life, doing things only when I wanted to. Later, I wandered into the living room and opened an old wooden chest that hadn't been touched in years. Inside were books, dozens of them, many I'd forgotten I still owned. Glenn and I had always loved reading. On winter nights after the kids went to bed, we'd sit by the fire, each with a book in hand, trading quotes like secrets. I ran a hand along the spines. Woolf, Baldwin, Austen, Steinbeck. Real people, writing about real things, not like the noise that filled this house lately, phones, TV, shallow laughter with nothing behind it. For years I'd been too tired to read, too distracted, too responsible. Now I had time. I had choice. I took one down at random and sank into the armchair by the window. Light spilled in from the east. I turned the first page and began to read. I don't know how long I sat like that. Time blurred. The clock didn't matter. Nothing pulled me away. No requests, no guilt, no lists. Eventually, I rose to stretch and wandered outside to the porch. The maple tree out front had lost most of its leaves. Only a few gold ones clung to the higher branches, trembling against the breeze. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and stood there, watching the neighborhood. Children walked to school, dragging backpacks behind them. A jogger passed with headphones in. Across the street, Mr. Connolly from 2 doors down was trying to coax his ancient Labrador off the lawn. Life kept moving, but mine had finally paused, and I was learning how to exist in that space. Not just survive, not just give, exist, breathe. After lunch, I wrote letters, not the kind you send, just ones that needed to come out. One to Glenn, telling him how I missed the way he fixed leaky faucets with cursing that somehow never felt angry. One to David, the son who had once written me poems for Mother's Day, now only writing when the Wi-Fi bill needed paying. One to myself. That one was the hardest. I wrote about how I'd forgotten who I was, how I'd made myself small so others could feel tall, how I'd called it love when it was really obligation, and how, through all of it, I never stopped believing, naively, that someday they'd see me again. But they didn't. Until I made them. That evening, Anna came by. She didn't text first, just knocked twice, her usual rhythm. I opened the door, and she held up 2 paper cups. Hot cocoa. I figured tea could take the night off. I laughed. How scandalous. She smiled and followed me into the living room. We sat in the same chairs we always did. Her with her knees tucked up. Me with a blanket over mine. I told my ethics professor about you, she said after a while. Oh? Yeah. She asked us to talk about the difference between justice and revenge. And I told her your story. I raised an eyebrow. And which one did you say I chose? She grinned. Justice. Quiet, measured, overdue justice. I sipped my cocoa. That's about right. We sat in silence for a while after that. Not because we had nothing to say, but because nothing needed saying. Eventually, she looked at me again. They're still scrambling, you know. I heard Dad yelling on the phone with the bank. Molly's trying to apply for another loan. I didn't react. I think they're starting to realize, she added. Realize what? That the center of the house wasn't the mortgage, Anna said softly. It was you. I reached out and touched her hand. No, I said. Not anymore. Now the center is wherever I choose to sit. She nodded, tears quietly gathering in her eyes. When she left that night, I felt the pull of the past loosening just a bit more, like a tight braid slowly unraveling, strand by strand. I had spent a lifetime weaving myself into everyone else's needs. Now I was learning how to let go. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Not a text, not an email. A real envelope with a trembling return address in Sandra's handwriting. It was addressed formally. Mrs. Helen Mason. That alone told me everything I needed to know. A plea disguised as decorum. I didn't open it right away. Let it sit on the hallway table while I made tea, fed the cat, and folded laundry. There was a time when any mail from my family stirred excitement. A card, a note, even a receipt. Proof I was part of the machine, still included in the churn of their lives. Now? It felt like someone sliding a hand under a door they'd slammed weeks ago. I finally sat down and slit the envelope open with a letter opener Glenn had given me when we were still dating, a smooth brass one shaped like a leaf. He always did have a sense of romance, even when paying bills. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten, a bit messy. Sandra had never been one for tidy emotion. Dear Helen, it began. Not Mom, not Mother. Just Helen. That little omission hit harder than most insults. She was already creating distance, trying to make this a negotiation instead of an apology. The first paragraph was small talk. Hope you're well. The weather's finally changed. David's been under a lot of stress. Nothing about what had happened. Nothing about what she'd said. Nothing about the fact that she'd insulted me in my own kitchen and expected the stove to stay hot. We've noticed the financial disruptions, the next page read. Disruptions. As if I were a glitch in their accounting software, not a woman reclaiming her worth. We're not angry, just confused. We wish you had come to us first before making such drastic changes. I folded that page and set it aside. I had come to them dozens of times, in quiet looks, in tired sighs, in the way I cleared dishes no one thanked me for and folded laundry no one noticed. I had come to them in casseroles and checks and rides to the airport. I had come to them every day for 20 years, and they hadn't once come back. Page 3 was the real purpose. We hope you'll reconsider. There's still the holidays and the children are expecting things to be as they were. If we can discuss a compromise, we'd all feel a bit more secure moving forward. I stared at that last sentence. A compromise. Security. As if I were an investment, a living, breathing pension plan. I folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. Later that evening, I wrote one of my own. Sandra, I received your letter. Thank you for taking the time. You mentioned that you're confused. Allow me to clarify. For decades, I gave. Willingly. Happily, even. I gave when it was inconvenient. I gave when it cost me sleep, health, comfort. I gave when it was unacknowledged. When I burned the casserole, you called me useless. You didn't whisper it. You didn't regret it. You said it loud enough for the walls to hear. That moment was the first time I realized. You all believed it. So I stopped giving. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. You want to discuss security. Let me tell you what feels secure to me now. Knowing my money is protected. Knowing Anna will have what she needs. Knowing I'm no longer funding a household where I'm treated like clutter. There is no compromise to be made. This isn't a negotiation. This is a declaration. I am not angry. I am simply done. Helen. I mailed it the next morning. No return address. Let them sit with it. That same afternoon, I received a letter from the bank. Confirmation that the trust fund for Anna had been approved and finalized. Everything was active. Automatic deposit set. Restrictions clear. It made me smile. For once, bureaucracy had delivered something beautiful. In the kitchen, I pinned the bank letter to the corkboard, right where I used to hang grocery lists and PTA reminders. A new kind of notice, a different kind of legacy. That evening, as the sun fell over the neighborhood and porch lights blinked on one by one, I sat outside in my old rocking chair, tea in hand, and listened. No phone calls, no knocks, just the slow, steady rhythm of peace earned, not given. And inside, tucked in a drawer, a copy of the letter I'd sent, just in case I ever needed to remember the sound of my own spine returning. They gathered without me on a Sunday. I know because I heard the front door slam and the rise and fall of voices downstairs, Sandra's sharp and clipped, David's slower, lower, trying to smooth things over like always. I didn't go down. I didn't offer coffee or snacks. I stayed upstairs in my chair, reading a book I wasn't really following, letting their noise rise through the floorboards like smoke from an old fire. It was the first time in years they'd gathered like this, and I wasn't at the center. I used to be the axis around which this house spun. I made the meals. I remembered the birthdays. I filled in the blanks when someone forgot a school form or a doctor's appointment. My hands were everywhere. Laundry, notes, bills paid quietly in the background. The invisible force that made the whole machine run. And now? Now they were downstairs with their silence and their tension, and no idea how to function without me. I didn't mean for it to feel like absence, but maybe it was supposed to. I heard Sandra say something about the optics, and David shushed her. Something about not in front of the kids. Then Molly chimed in, her voice sharp with disbelief, and someone slammed a drawer. Not once did I hear my name said with softness. Not once did anyone come upstairs. They stayed down there for hours, discussing, debating, whispering. That's what they'd always been good at, talking about me instead of to me. I think part of them still believed this was a phase, that I'd come back to the kitchen eventually, that I'd forget how it felt to be called useless, and that the checks would start flowing again just like they used to. But something had shifted. Something real. It wasn't anger. I wasn't boiling with rage or plotting revenge. No, that would have meant I still cared about how they saw me. This was different. This was something like grief. Grief for the woman I used to be. For the mother who gave until there was nothing left. For the years I let slip through my fingers thinking I was needed, when really I was just convenient. The old me would have gone downstairs, would have smiled tightly, poured coffee, pretended we were all still a family in the way that word is supposed to mean something. But the new me, the woman who'd finally reclaimed her voice, stayed seated. I finished my chapter. I made a cup of tea. I watered the plant on the windowsill that had somehow survived the same neglect I had. And when the front door finally opened again, when the voices faded and the cars pulled out of the driveway, I didn't rush to the window. I didn't ask what they'd decided. I didn't care, because I already knew. They'd gathered without me, and they'd felt the gap. That night, Anna came by. She knocked twice, then let herself in when I called down. She walked in with a kind of reverence, like she knew the air in the house had changed. "Were they here?" she asked, toeing off her shoes at the door. They were. "And?" "They sat in the kitchen for 3 hours and didn't even glance at the stairs." Anna frowned. "Did you want them to come up?" "No, I said, but I wanted them to want to. She understood that, sat beside me without trying to fix it, which was the kindest thing she could have done. I saw Dad at the store yesterday, she said after a while. He looked tired, like someone unplugged him. Maybe someone did. We sipped tea in silence. I think they're starting to realize, Anna said. They'll realize too late, I replied. That's the thing about people who take and take. They don't recognize value until it's gone. I'm sorry. You didn't do it. I know, I'm just sorry it took all this for them to see you. I looked at her. This girl, this young woman, was the only one who'd asked me how I was every time she visited, who offered to bring groceries even when I didn't need them, who listened. They still don't see me, I said gently. They see what I gave, what I stopped giving. That's different. Anna was quiet for a moment. Do you ever wish you'd done this sooner? I thought about it, about the decades, the decisions, the meals, the silences. No, I said, because back then, I still believed they saw me. I had to lose that belief before I could find myself again. When she left that night, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt chosen. By me. For me. Let them gather again next Sunday. Let them fill the rooms I once kept warm. They can sit in my kitchen and wonder when the center stopped holding. I'll be upstairs, exactly where I'm supposed to be, at peace, unburdened, and finally, wholly mine. Anna came over again the next afternoon. She let herself in without knocking this time, just pushed open the door and called my name like someone who finally understood she didn't need permission to be welcome. I brought shortbread, she said, holding up a tin. And lemon curd? Figured you might be in the mood for something sweet. I smiled. I'm always in the mood for lemon curd. Sit down. We settled in the living room. The sun poured through the window in long slants, warming the arm of the couch where Glenn used to nap on Sundays. The house felt still, but not empty. Not anymore. Anna poured the tea without asking. She knew how I liked it. Dark, one sugar, no milk. She always remembered the little things, not out of duty, but love. Real love. After a few minutes of quiet, she looked at me over her cup. They told me you changed the will. I didn't flinch. Did they? She nodded. Dad didn't say much, but Molly, she's furious, said you're trying to punish everyone from beyond the grave. I laughed. Not a loud one, just the dry kind that comes from being far too old for melodrama. It's not punishment, I said. It's protection. Anna nodded. From what? From being erased, I said. From letting people take pieces of me after I'm gone the same way they did while I was here. She grew quiet, the way she always did when something landed too hard to speak right away. I didn't leave them out entirely, I added. Just made sure what I've built goes where it will be respected. And you trust me with that? I looked at her. Really looked. Her steady gaze, her hands, calm and sure. The kindness in her that wasn't performative, wasn't transactional. You're the only one I trust, I said. You never asked for a thing, and you gave more than anyone. She blinked back tears, nodded. I won't let you down. I know. We sat for a while, eating shortbread and watching the shadows shift across the floor. She told me about her classes, how one professor lectured with his eyes closed, how another let them read poems in place of essays. She said she wanted to write about dignity next, about what it looked like, felt like. I told her she already was. Before she left, she asked if she could borrow one of Glenn's old books. Which one? The Baldwin one, no name in the street. I handed it to her. The cover was cracked, pages soft from years of reading. Glenn used to underline whole paragraphs and leave little pencil notes in the margins. I watched her hold it carefully, like it meant something. It did. "That one meant a lot to him," I said. "It means a lot to me, too." After she left, I sat alone with the warmth she left behind. And I knew, without doubt, without question, that whatever I had passed on, whatever legacy I'd shaped, had landed somewhere solid. Not in bank accounts, not in legal forms. In her. That night, I slept better than I had in years. No phone ringing, no guilt, no invisible weight pressing on my chest. Just the soft rhythm of rain outside and the quiet strength of knowing that I had done the hardest thing a woman in my position could do. I had stopped being useful and started being whole. The holidays came and went without much fanfare. No giant tree, no 15-pound turkey, no guest towels ironed and folded just so. I used to break my back trying to make everything perfect. Perfect centerpiece, perfect music, perfect smile, even when no one noticed the work it took to keep it all standing. But this year, I didn't decorate. I didn't cook. I didn't ask who was coming or when. And no one asked me. Sandra sent a group text with a photo of the family around a different table. White plates, wine glasses, a store-bought ham sitting proud in the middle like it had been earned. Molly's caption under it read, "Grateful for what we have." What they had. I didn't reply. David didn't call. Not even out of obligation. And maybe that should have hurt more than it did. But truthfully, I felt something closer to relief, like a debt had finally been cleared. Not financial. Emotional. The kind that builds interest when no one says thank you. On Christmas morning, I made myself pancakes. Just 2. Sat in my robe by the window with jazz on the radio and watched the frost melt off the hedges. I didn't miss the noise, or the pressure, or the waiting for someone to remember that I was there, behind the gravy boat, watching them live like I was some old shadow they tolerated. I was alone, but not lonely. That was the difference they'd never understood. Later that week, I went to see Mr. Keating one last time. Not because anything had gone wrong, just to sign the final revisions. The house, upon my death, would go to Anna, with the clause that it couldn't be sold until she'd lived in it for at least 2 full years. She deserves to know what it's like to live in a house that's truly hers, I told him. Not borrowed, not conditional. Hers. He nodded. "That's generous." "It's justice," I said. "And the rest?" he asked. "David and Sandra will get a letter. 1 page. Nothing cruel, just clear. Molly gets a small amount in a conditional trust. Enough to show I didn't forget her. Not enough to be misused." "And the furniture?" he asked, flipping through the inventory. "All to Anna," I said. "Especially Glenn's desk. He built it with his hands. No one ever looked at it twice but her." He smiled. "You've thought of everything." "I had time," I said. "They left me a lot of space to think." As I left the office, he stood to shake my hand. "I hope they understand someday," he said. I paused at the door. That's no longer my concern. The winter rolled on quietly. Days short, nights long. I fell into a rhythm of simple joys. Reading, cooking only what I wanted. A single flower in a vase instead of bouquets no one noticed. Anna visited often. Always with something. Stories, biscuits, new music. She never came empty-handed, but never with her hand out. That mattered more than she knew. One afternoon, she brought a small envelope. "I know you don't need this," she said, placing it on the table. "But I started saving a little for my campus job, just in case." I looked at it. Maybe $60, maybe less. But it was the most generous thing I'd seen in years. "You keep that," I said. "But thank you." "It's just my way of saying I see you," she said. And that was the point of all of this. Not money, not revenge, not silence. To be seen, truly seen. One evening, I sat on the porch wrapped in an old quilt, watching the sky turn purple. The maple tree was bare now, limbs like bones against the dusk. I thought of all the years I'd stood in that very spot, watching for headlights, listening for the sound of someone coming home hungry. And now? No one needed feeding. No one expected anything. And I was more full than I'd ever been. I didn't expect to live this long. I suppose most women like me don't. We just keep going because someone needs something. A ride, a casserole, a second chance. But now, in the quietest chapter of my life, I see it plain. The real miracle isn't how long I've lived. It's that I finally started living for myself, not in some grand, dramatic way. No cliff jumping, no bold new wardrobe, no late-in-life romance. Just quiet, just clarity, just the removal of every yes I never meant, and the reclaiming of every no I was afraid to say. I get up slowly these days. The joints complain, the mirror tells the truth I used to avoid. But none of that hurts the way silence used to. The kind of silence that comes after someone insults you, and no one in the room thinks it's worth defending you. That's the silence I buried. That's the silence I'll never allow again. Anna came by yesterday with a pie she baked herself. Crust a little too thick, apples still firm, cinnamon heavy. I told her it was perfect, not because I was being kind, but because it was. It was effort, it was care, and it was mine. She sat at the table, legs curled under her, talking about her classes, her future, the little apartment she might rent next year. And I saw it again, that unmistakable spark of someone who's been loved right. Not funded, not tolerated. Seen, known. That was my gift to her. Not money, not the house. A blueprint. A way forward that didn't begin and end in someone else's shadow. After she left, I pulled out a small box from under my bed. Inside were the letters. My letter to Sandra, to David, to Molly. I'd rewritten them over and over, not out of spite, but precision. Each word chosen carefully, like a seam stitched into a dress I knew they'd wear whether they liked the fit or not. "This isn't punishment," I wrote in every letter. "It's the cost of choosing convenience over kindness." I placed them with the will, with the trust documents, all labeled and dated. No secrets. No room for confusion. Just the truth, laid out in black and white, as it should have been all along. And then I did something small. Maybe silly. I wrote myself a letter. "Dear Helen," it began. "You did not imagine it. You were not too sensitive. You were not ungrateful or dramatic or old-fashioned. They really did treat you like a fixture. They really did forget how many storms you stood through to keep them dry. But you remembered, and you remembered in time. That's what matters. Not the years you gave without thanks, but the moment you stopped. That moment was yours. That dignity is yours." I folded it and placed it on my nightstand. Not for anyone else to find. Just for me. A quiet reminder that it's never too late to return to yourself. Now the house is still. The air holds a kind of reverence. Not for who I used to be, but for who I am now in the last chapters. Writing every line for myself. Let them call me bitter. Let them call me distant. They once called me useless. They forgot who paid for the roof above their heads. But I didn't forget. And now I've built something else. Something they can't take, twist, or spend. I've built a boundary, a home inside myself. A legacy that begins with one woman standing up finally after too many years of sitting down. So to every woman reading this, every mother, every grandmother, every woman who's been silenced by gratitude she never agreed to, don't wait for them to value you. Show them how. Start today. Start now. And if the world keeps calling you useless, let them. You'll be too busy living.